Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. What a delight.
It's my absolute pleasure. You got a bit of chaos going on in your house this morning.
I feel like there's actually always chaos going on in my house. It's like it follows me around. I think I'm a very calm person, but then behind the scenes, it's just madness.
So wonderful to see you face to face again.
Oh, it's so lovely to see you. It was just so divine to meet you in person. And that was, when I came out to Gippsland, how long was it
In
ago
March.
now? Yeah, in March. That was pretty much the first time I'd really gone anywhere and met new people. And it was just so special. And I fell in love with all of you. So it's really, really lovely to see you again.
Uh, we didn't get a choice, did because when I meet people, I ambush them with a massive big hug, and it's there's a lot of things you're doing actually, but let's start from scratch. And so, as I said in the intro, you've moved into the wellness space with matcha powder and everything, and then you've also sort of challenging, happiness with your podcast and your book. But what got you there? Like, how did you start off life? Did you start off with this little kid going, "I'm going to drink matcha powder and I'm going to make the world happy," or what happened?
Well, part of what has now become the CCA philosophy is the very idea that most of the time you don't wake up knowing what your purpose is and where you're meant to be and what your joy is. And so it's been a very roller coaster, unexpected journey full of twists and turns, very non-linear. But eventually I think all the dots start to connect. And that's what I love is that, when you do trace back from the very beginning of people's stories, most of the time, none of it is, it's not clear what kind of pathway or where people are going to end up. And that's the beautiful thing, to just trust that each chapter is going to lead you to the next thing.
Yeah.
But definitely had no idea that this is going to, that this is how it was going to end up for most of that time. So back to the very, very beginning, as you mentioned, my first home in Australia was in Warragul, but I was born in an orphanage in South Korea and adopted by an incredible Australian family when I was 5 months old. So while it sounds like it could be, for some quite a traumatic experience, I have no memory of, being 5 months old. Most of us don't, and have been, supported so incredibly by our family to appreciate what a beautiful story that is, and to not sort of feel like, it's been weird, or, we've really been encouraged to embrace that unique story. And I think it's left us with two things. First, I've always, rather than, spending a lot of our life trying to suppress what makes us different and trying to, fit in and be the same, when you're a fully blown Asian kid and your parents are white Caucasian dairy farmers from Warragul, you got to get across embracing your difference pretty early. So that set me up well for that. But the other thing is, because I know how different it could have been. Korea was a third world country at the time. It was the 80s. There was no education for women, a lot of child slave labor, and a lot of issues facing the country that don't necessarily affect it now. But that idea of sliding doors moments, that but for one small decision or event, everything could have been different, which has meant I've always been really eager to leave no stone unturned. So all through primary school, all through high school, and even into uni, I sort of have, the best way to describe it is that I was equal parts nerdburger and arty farty. So really loved academics. I cried in prep when I didn't get homework on my first day. But also always loved sport and drama and music. And maybe because I did have such a keen sense of gratitude for living in this beautiful country, it's kind of led to this over enthusiasm for everything. And I actually think it's so wonderful to be multi-passionate, but when it comes to career choice time, it almost makes it more difficult because you've got too many interests and the pathway isn't necessarily clear or obvious. So I kept going doing everything as long as I could, obviously with a few diversions, a bit of a naughty wild child phase in the teen years there, but then eventually came back around and ended up getting quite a good score at the end of school. I chose law only by a process of elimination, more because I knew I didn't like blood. So that kind of ruled out medicine and the sciences. And I didn't really feel like a commerce, business-minded person back then. So I thought, well, what's left? I was at that time only thought that there were 5 careers that existed and had to choose one. So yeah, I ended up in law thinking it was a sensible thing to do. And I think that's around the time where I stopped listening to what I'm good at and what I love and started to let ideas of success and societal expectations of what a good, stable, respectable life kind of looks like. And looking back, I never was unhappy as a lawyer. Actually, I was so grateful to have a job. I'd come through uni in the GFC, so I was grateful to be getting any kind of opportunities, and let alone at a really good firm where I was lucky enough to start. But now it gives me goosebumps to look back and think, if you're actively unhappy, you'll probably change your life, because you'll get to the point where it gets so untenable that the discomfort will push you to make a change.
Mm.
If you're fine, I don't think you start looking for what else there is, because you don't really know any different. And that's the people that I worry most about. If they don't have an autopilot circuit breaker, you risk sitting in fine for decades of your life and missing out on amazing.
Mm.
And I was definitely in that camp. I was very blinded by how successful my job seemed. It was fancy, there was prestige. I was climbing a ladder that it turns out I didn't really care about that much, but at the time it felt good.
Yeah.
And it was only a very happy accident that allowed me to see a whole nother side of myself and the world and the job opportunities that exist in the gray areas in between. And that was such a long story, but I ended up in all places in Rwanda with my now husband, who had a creative agency, and he got to go and as a sponsor, and I was able to join. And one of the big things coming from an orphanage, I thought the big takeaway would be just how incredibly lucky we are in Australia, which is of course what I felt.
Yeah.
But I also had the reverse revelation of seeing people who didn't have success or progress as I understood it, but had more happiness
Yeah.
than the people back home who were stressed about getting more and
Yeah.
achieving more and playing on their devices. The kids would laugh for 12 hours at a leaf. And
Yeah.
I'd never separated happiness and success before. So that kind of planted the seed. And then the second thing I came home with was a gut parasite, which was great way to lose pounds for the first 5 kilos. And then after that, not very nice at all. And I was banned from coffee. So the whole matcha journey was a purely selfish exercise of trying to find a healthier form of caffeination that wouldn't send me into a complete breakdown. And that's how it all started. Total random fork in the road that I didn't even know was around the corner. And I think that's why now I'm so passionate about the idea that, you don't need to have a 50-year plan or a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Be in the now and be open-minded, and you never know what could be
Yeah.
coming up next for you.
When you talk about kids playing with a leaf, you realize that happiness is not in things. It's in a space in time, and it's who you're connected with. And yeah, I love that. Now this matcha, why did you think how did you know it would cure a gut bug? Is this something it's known for, or what?
Well, it was actually, so I collapsed at work. I was so detached, I think, from any kind of wellness, or I had no concept that we have limits and you actually have to look after yourself. I was such an A-type. Like my whole identity was wrapped up in productivity and achievement, that it took firstly, it took a complete breakdown for me to even realize I had to stop. But it took the next couple of months of really having to learn about what foods you eat, the effect of stimulants like caffeine and alcohol. I just never thought of that because I never had to before. I just thrashed my body and it would kind of still, bounce back the next day. And I sort of came to Matcha not so much as for the gut problem. I had a course of antibiotics. I had full elimination diets to really go gently on my system until it could cope with things again. Matcha was more just for the caffeine. And coffee, I was maybe 42 kilos at the time, and I'm like 170 centimeters tall, so really, really thin. So I'd have a sip of coffee and I'd start shaking. Matcha has a unique amino acid in it called L-theanine, which makes it slow release into your bloodstream. So you get the energy, but rather than a crash like you get with coffee, it kind of lasts over 3 to 4 hours in a really alert state, but not that buzzy kind of jittery
Yeah.
feeling. So I came to it more for that I, was missing the experience of a hot drink and something that would help me get through the working day when I was still quite exhausted and
Yeah.
adrenally compromised. And it was interesting. I discovered it in Hong Kong, where in Asia, it's not a buzzword. It's not a new thing. It's been around for centuries. The Zen Buddhist monks have been using it for many, many years in their long meditations. And it's the same as normal green tea. It's much more known for its immunity and its antioxidants, but matcha has 137 times the antioxidants of normal green tea. So
Oh, wow.
it's incredible. And I sort of came to it for one reason and then discovered actually there are so many benefits to it. And when was really surprised then when, I mean, gut, it is good for your gut. So that was something that I later discovered and much better for you than caffeine. But also the immunity, the hair, skin and nails, the antioxidant that help prevent free radical damage to your skin and to your organs. And it wasn't until I came back that I noticed, well, what? This has been around for centuries. It's so beneficial. Everyone at home is drinking kale smoothies that taste disgusting and spirulina that tastes like foot. Like, why is no one drinking matcha? And over the next, I think it was maybe only a month of realizing that and then realizing, well, we can't get it, so we should order some. It arrived. It was too much for us. 2 million serves, too much for two
Wow.
people to consume. But like, we just had no idea. The idea came to really leverage the fact that everyone wanted that kind of product. They all wanted really efficient, densely nutritious, easy to consume things that are good for you and natural, but no one had made this particular product really easy to buy.
Yeah.
And it turned out what we thought would maybe be sold to like a few family members, maybe some friends,
Yeah.
ended up selling out in a week because people
Wow.
had heard of the benefits. They did understand what green tea is good for. And this was just green tea on steroids because it's just
Mm.
the leaves ground into a powder. So instead of throwing them out in the tea bag, you actually just grind them and you swallow the whole leaf. So it's exactly the same as green tea, but just stronger.
And you're right. It's funny, isn't it? Because we do drink green tea, but to imagine that you can get 137 times the power just by drinking matcha, well, why wouldn't you? So if you wanted to go in and taste it, because people really do want to sort of sit there and have the enjoyment of it. You've got the matcha milk bar, which
Mm.
is a physical location. So tell us about that and why did you think that might be a good idea?
We ended up, I think it was probably a year after we started Matcha Maiden, we were in the States because we'd locked in a big contract with Urban Outfitters. We went over to visit them and meet them. But we also thought, this is a good place to look at what the new trends are, like what's happening in the health food scene, because it usually emerges in the coastal, like LA, New York first.
Yeah.
And we happened to be over there at the same time as our now business partner, who was a really good friend who also did law. We went to uni together. He went straight into hospitality and became really, really successful with his brother. So he was looking at food trends and we were looking at drink trends. So we thought, well, if we're here together, let's just do a sort of foodie cafe tour of LA. And we noticed that two big trends were emerging. The main two were plant-based eating and matcha drinking. And the two things that we figured from a lot of, we did a lot of research on why these two were, neither of them were new. They're all like been around for a long time. Why are they resurging now? And the big thing was the blue zones research. There are 5 areas of the world, tiny geographical areas where people live dramatically longer than anywhere else. Like I'm talking a suburb size. And it doesn't really necessarily make sense why one suburb lives to 100 and the next suburb lives, the average age is 20 years younger. But so there've been all these studies on why they live longer. And one of the main factors is they have a majority plant-based diet, not because of ethical vegan reasons, but just what is available to them. And the blue zone with the most 100-year-olds in the world is Okinawa in Japan. And they drink matcha. So we thought, rather than what exists back home, which is a lot of plant-based venues that are quite, I don't mean to sound, quite preachy, like very aggressive in their messaging, very all or nothing, which can be quite intimidating to the average kind of foodie. We were like, what if we created something that was longevity based, that was based on this whole idea of living longer, which is why there's a beauty industry. Like we all love this idea of longevity, it also works out to tie in with longevity for the planet. No one's positioned it this way. What if we make a cafe, it's vegan, we don't ever tell anyone it, like we don't use that word, and then just people come in, they eat great food, they drink great matcha, they walk out, they live longer, the planet lives longer. What an amazing idea.
Yep.
And a month later, we opened. It's kind of like a cafe. So it's more breakfast, lunch.
Yeah.
The breakfast menu we developed, we were like, what are the big gaps to plant-based eating at breakfast time? And the main thing is eggs. Like if you can't have eggs and bacon, like that's most people's favorite breakfast. So we set out to get our chefs to create a vegan egg that has the same amount of protein as a normal egg, that has like a poached, like there's a yolk that kind of, you know, oozes out. Like it needs to be nutritious as well, but also we wanted it to be rainbow. We wanted it to be crazy and lots of fun. So we made, you know, 9 superfood lattes that make a rainbow. Like there's a full rainbow of different colored drinks. Some have caffeine, some don't. We just got really adventurous with like what's going to be super fun, really different, but also that you leave feeling full, because that's another big barrier to people eating vegan is girls will bring their boyfriends in who are looking for like a burger and they leave and they feel like they've eaten lettuce, whereas our chicken burger is like, 3 of our friends actually for ages were like, why do you have chicken in a vegan restaurant? They thought it was chicken. Our chefs are amazing. And it was such a fun challenge to figure out the gaps that existed and how we could fill them and how we could use food science to kind of, you know, create something that hadn't really been done before. And it's, so much fun. There are burgers. When KFC opened next door, we decided we needed to make, you know, fried chicken buckets that are vegan, that taste like chicken. So we've developed like this whole fried chicken menu that uses jackfruit. It pulls apart like chicken. It's so yummy.
Yeah.
And it's just so much fun.
You're the epitome of jump in, live in the moment, seize the yay, you know. and I just absolutely love it. So guys, get onto the matcha. Honestly, you know, it is good for you. And don't be like me and say, yeah, one day I will, and then don't do it. Just be like Sarah and, and jump in and get the bloody stuff. That's fantastic.
You realize that a lot of the reason why you don't do things isn't because you're not good at it, isn't because you're not suited to it. It's because of negative self-talk. It's because of self-doubt. It's because of fear. It's because of all the wrong reasons. They're natural things to feel, but they shouldn't lead you to go to totally, you know, cancel out a pathway just because it seems like it's impossible.
Yeah. We don't let go of what we don't like. You know, we're real buggers at hanging on to that stuff. You know, it's like, well, I've realized I don't like this about my life, but I'm not going to let it go. Like particularly toxic people. Like we've got, you know, the negative narratives. We're bad enough that we tell ourselves negative narratives. Then we believe that everyone else is saying that same narrative about us. But then you've also got this next level of toxic people who are completely keeping us down in a box because it doesn't suit them for us to flourish. You know, it somehow impacts them, or they think it's going to. And then we allow ourselves to sort of live by the expectations of others. And I think if we could get this system happening, and even just small questions, like you say, chip away at it bit by bit. Is that serving me? You know, or is that, how do I feel when that person says that? I feel like shit. You know, well, can I let that person go? You know, and I think we've got to get better at we don't have to be mean to the person and say, listen, you're not serving me. You know, we don't really, but just move away from the things that really make us unhappy. And I love what you're saying. And so you've then gone and started the podcast, seize the yay, because and I need to read this because I don't want to get it wrong. Investigating the difference between success and happiness, and you've touched on tons of points in there, you know, about what is success and what is happiness. And since starting the podcast, like what's an emerging theme that, you know, about the difference between success and happiness?
That's a great question. Well, I think the overall emerging theme is that they're not the same thing. They're really closely related, and of course they impact on each other. But if you only attach your happiness to the level of success that you have, you'll never be satisfied. Yeah. And I think almost everyone who's ever come on the show who outwardly appears incredibly successful, most of them have had a moment of all those metrics starting to tumble down around them because it just doesn't bring them happiness, and there's always more,
Yeah.
and have had some kind of breakdown or aha moment and realized, actually, like, that's great. That provides success, provides choices and freedom to indulge my happiness, but it has to be attached to other things, because otherwise you get in this cycle of like, I'll be happy
Yeah.
when I get that next raise or promotion, or when I hit those, those boxes are ticked, but you'll always find new boxes to tick. So I think it really has emerged as a very internal thing that has to be about where you are right now. It can't always be what's next and what else can I get. And that's if it's ever been more obvious to me, it's when I came back from Africa being filled with just spontaneous joy. I didn't wear shoes. We didn't have floors. We didn't have running water for a month. And I was so joyful in each moment, and came home to incredibly privileged, well-off people who were just depressed.
But now Seize Your Yay podcast has now become Seize Your Yay book as well. And so it's ever evolving, and what are we doing next? A documentary, or talk about but the book. So what was it that made you say, right, this has to be out there in a book? Well, I'm going to do it. What was that?
Yeah, again, it was one of those totally unplanned, random opportunities that, because I didn't actually have a plan for Seize the A, it was really started as almost a side project to the Matcha mission kind of thing, to give me this sort of outlet for all the things I wasn't getting in that job. And then it became like, it took on a life of its own. I sort of made a promise to myself that one thing I'd done is I'd left corporate to create more freedom and creativity and joy. And then I just corporatized Matcha. Like, I did the same thing, that I replicated all the things that I tried to walk away from. And I really wanted to learn from that and not do that again, not bring all those habits with me and then burn out over and over. What's the point? I might as well go back to corporate. So when Seize the A started to kind of gain traction, I made a commitment that I wouldn't give it a 5-year plan. I would just see where it went, where it took me, what was feeling good. And, if one week it didn't feel good to do an episode, I wouldn't do an episode. It had no commercial element at the start. So I just kind of rolled with it. And that allowed, I think sometimes when you plan too hard, you preclude better plans arriving because you're too rigidly focused on where it's going to go. But because I had no plans, it grew to the point where a publisher sort of thought, well, maybe this could be translated into a book. Maybe all the lessons, I'd done 100 episodes by then, I think. So maybe you could collate the experience and big learnings into something that could be kept forever. Whereas, audio kind of you can't hand audio to someone the same way you can a book. And I'd always wanted to write a book. I loved writing my thesis in law. Like, writing was probably the part of law I liked the most. I always did creative writing. I used to write random like fiction stories when I was a kid. So I'd had it in my body. But this also comes back to timing, that if I'd tried to write a book any minute before the CCA book happened, it wouldn't have been good, because I wouldn't have known what to write. I wasn't ready. Like, timing is everything. Sometimes you think you want something so badly, but it's actually not the right time, which is often the universe intervenes and is like, no, not yet.
That happens.
And if I tried to write it about the Matcha story before Seize the A had crystallized to me as my philosophy, like, it just would have not had half the stuff in it that it does. So two things happened that I'm really happy about. I wrote it as if no one was ever going to read it, which means you write more honestly, which is weird and awful, but amazing at the same time. And I also wrote it not knowing that COVID would be in full swing by the time it came out. But it turned out that so many of the lessons about uncertainty and breaking the autopilot circuit and embracing discomfort and tragedy as an opportunity to change, all those things turned out to be more relevant than they ever could have been.
I have loved this interview. You're just you're a shining light, and you're so bloody positive. And I love the way you're just kind of, reinforcing that message just stop and enjoy the yay. Just enjoy it, and stop trying to force our lives into a box that we might not even fit in. And your message about timing too, I think a lot of us could really, really take that on board, because I reckon most of us force things, to happen. And I love your timing message. Love it. Now, this podcast is about get off the bench, and you've done it, in a number of ways. I mean, let's say prior to Matcha Maiden, but then you've done the 4 big things, just in the last few years. And I just love that you're taking that leap and just trusting everything. But what advice would you give to someone, I'm going to go back to corporate, who's stuck in corporate, who thinks I've got a great idea and I'm just not game to leave the security of this space, but I love that other thing so much?
Oh, okay. It's such a good question. So the biggest thing that I think is, I only have started to reflect on this in the last year, I think. I was very gung-ho, like, leave your job, CCA, like, take a risk, blah, 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 YOLO. I probably would temper that a little bit now and say the balance between your job and your passion is going to look different for everyone. For me, it was going full-time. For some people, that actually kills the joy of the side hustle. For some people, it takes up so much stress then, or it's not, the novelty of it goes away, or the pressure increases in a way that it actually ruins it for them. So the first above all, I would say, think very carefully about whether you are just following this, I think I have to leave my job for my passion because other people have done that, or if you actually think that that's something that you want to do. Because there are people who, they don't need to love their job. They just need to go there so it gives them money to have a stable life and do their hobbies and passions outside of work. And that's a beautiful balance if that's what suits you. So above all, think very carefully about what suits you and try and block out too much white noise about what's worked for other people. If you have decided that you really want to pursue it and you do think it's a really good idea, but it's just fear that's holding you back, another 2 things I would say. First is, you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. So if you don't have an absolute 100% guarantee about what it's going to be doing in 5 years, you never will anyway. Business doesn't work like that. So don't worry about that. All you have to do is take those very first steps. And like, I kind of, in the Matcha example, our big goal was, what does it take to sell 1 bag? If I thought about 100 bags, I'd stress out so much I'd stop, and I would never actually have done it. 1 bag is not intimidating. It gives you a very clear to-do list and an immediate one, because all you need to think about is the immediate next steps. The 11th step is irrelevant if you haven't done step 1. So don't even waste energy and brain space on it. So think about your minimum viable product and what do you need for that, and the rest starts to unravel. If you get paralyzed of like overwhelm, just start there. And if you can make 1 bag, you can make 10. If you can make 10, you can probably make 20. Like, don't overthink it and over plan. Just take the first step and the rest of the staircase will worry about itself later. And the second thing is, if you're worried about it failing, what is the worst that can happen? And I think we catastrophize that situation a lot, again, which leads us to not do things that could work out really well. Usually the worst thing that can happen if you actually let yourself think about what that is not that bad. You won't end up destitute and homeless. You won't be like relegated to the bottom of society where everyone laughs at you. Like, it just is nowhere near as bad as you think it's going to be. So just say it doesn't work. Like, I actually think we're more scared of looking like a failure than we are of actual failure. If you told me I could fail and no one would know, I'd be like, oh, I don't care then. It's more like looking silly. If you get over that and realize, if that's the worst that can happen is that I look silly for 5 minutes, but everyone's actually too busy with their own shit to like even notice. It's, even if it fails, it's still not bad. So just try it with, minimize the risk as much as you can, stay as your job as long as you can to save money to put towards it, and like ease into it. And if it doesn't work, you can go back or you can tweak it and try again. Like, most of us aren't having ideas that involve $1 million investing into an app for the first time. Like, start smaller, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And be gentle with yourself,
Yeah.
like be okay with 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back, because the beauty of the process is that you don't know what you're doing. I still don't. You probably still don't, but you start to enjoy that.
I have loved this. This has just been a
Me
breath of,
too.
breath of fresh air. Thank you so much. Now, where can people find you?
Oh, well, I live on the internet. So anywhere on the internet. Spoonful of Sarah is the main spot on Instagram, because everything else, the podcast, the book, the cafes, that's all linked to there. So that's probably the easiest.
Yeah. And there's you've got website, Facebook, all of that kind of stuff. So I'll post all that in the show notes. But if people just go to Instagram, Spoonful of Sarah, and go from there and get yourself some matcha and and get your gut back into good health, because and everything else. And I love the sound of the slow release caffeine, and that it's just doesn't give you that headachy buzz. That it's I love that. No, I just love everything you're doing. I just love your vibrancy. I just love
Oh.
that you're bringing a really, really beautiful, warm heart and love into the world, and with a bit of fun. And I just think that's beautiful. Really.
Oh, you, Karen. Everything you do is absolutely amazing. It's been a privilege.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, you better go and make sure that when the car left the driveway today, he didn't leave things in the driveway, throwing them
Oh
out.
my God, shipping him off to Tasmania. I'm like, it's girl time.
I love it. I love it.
Have an
Oh,
amazing weekend.
yeah, you too. Thank you so much. See you
Thank
soon.
you.
See ya.
Bye.